Question for you all on this fine spring day. I say fine, it is so cold outside. It is as cold as the UK government's hearts right now. What did you learn about in history at school? I went to an English state school, and history there was all British history, obviously. Like the Tudors and Henry VIII and stuff like that. But when we did touch on Black history, it was all centered around the West. And I think the funniest thing is we did the civil rights movement in America. You know, at tonight there was no racism in England. But who set that system up? The education system here never really touches on any sort of Black history prior to colonialism. And would have you believe there just was nothing much of interest there. Like, you know, before the white people came to Africa, we all just stood there like doing nothing. But we know better. Obviously, there's so much rich and vast history across the continent of Africa, and so many interesting stories. So today, I'm going to bring you some knowledge of my favourite African kingdoms and some interesting stories from them. So get comfy, get some snacks and a drink, and let's talk about it. Hi, welcome back to my channel, or extra warm welcome, hugs if you're new here. Hope any symptoms you're fighting will soon be kept at bay. But while you're going through them, give yourself permission to lie around and do nothing and I don't know, maybe subscribe to me and binge and watch all my essays. So this is going to be a fun, different one. Maybe if you'll like it, I'll turn my whole channel into this because I'm a people pleaser. Before I get into this, I didn't learn any of this stuff in school, like anything anywhere near that. If it wasn't for my mum telling me stories at home, thankfully, and just almost like things passed down. My mum's like Nigerian and Ghanaian, just about culture, pre-colonialism, and also just like things that have been passed down through our family. The education system really would have given me a warped perception on Africa. And yes, it's deliberate because you know what? It's not just the education system, it's also the news, the media. There still is, and definitely was, more of an abundance back then of this narrative of Africa. And the whole of it, number one. Don't get me started, because people treat the whole continent like it's just one nation. It's all one people, one ethnic group. They all speak the same language. Nowhere else on the planet gets treated like that. But the reality also is like all the notes from colonialism, the scientific racism, the ignorance all drip down and continue, you know, to be dripping down into people's views still. And I'm not just talking about non-Black people here. Obviously, this racism comes from people worldwide. And I have seen plenty of Black people in my time say some very ignorant, obnoxious shit about Africa. Was it that politician that said, I'm glad slavery happened because otherwise I'll still be in Africa dancing in a bush somewhere? She said that like within the past couple of years. Now, over the years, I've just spent time learning and researching mainly the countries, you know, that my family is from, which are all West African. One thing I did find hard to do was find like proper, decent, accurate information, because most of the information that we have access to is either written, you know, like notes written by colonizers, because they destroyed a lot of stuff from actual Africans over their campaign there, or it's written by like white historians, like white scholars, and a lot of them don't really come to it with the best attitude. Like they either have like a fetish for the country or the tribe or whatever they're looking into, or they'll like have some sort of like savior complex, or generally just some like Western centric view, which means that they can never really appreciate like fully what different cultures are. Just different. So saying all that though, I've tried my best to dig through a lot of different sources from the information I've brought to you. And yeah, before I get into this, I just want to remind people, because I'm talking about kingdoms, like kingdoms ethically weren't great by today's standards. Every kingdom of centuries past had questionable ethics, but they were often built upon different mixtures of like needing to survive and some amount of a superiority complex. But to be real, if every state around you, every nation, every tribe is warring or looked into some conflict and you get sucked into it and it's kill or be killed, annex or be annexed, what would you do if you feel like that's the only way to achieve peace? And on that note, talk about war, let's talk about a nation that spawned a leader who transformed its military through innovation and went down in history as a military genius. Welcome to the Zulu Kingdom. Based in Southern Africa, the Zulu Kingdom had its beginnings in the 1800s by a name that everyone knows, Shaka Zulu. He was the illegitimate son of the chieftain of the Zulu and the princess of another clan, the Langeli. Now, he and his mother were banished from the clan by their dad, as is the kind of like relationship violated Zulu tradition. So they sought refuge with his mother's clan. But annoyingly, they were ousted from there as well. Eventually, they sought refuge with another clan that kept them safe called the Dletsheni, which was subservient to another powerful clan called the Mthethwa. The Mthethwa were made up of 30 chieftains, which made a confederation. When Shaka Zulu turned 23, he was among many other men that were called to join the military. He was a natural warrior, and when the chieftain found out that he was descended from royalty, he was put in charge of a regiment, which gave him valuable kind of like military and tactician experience. In 1816, when Shaka Zulu's father passed, his king, Dingiswayo, released him from service so he could return home and take power. However, his younger brother had been named heir apparent. So what did Shaka Zulu do? He killed that motherfucker and took the Zulu throne for his own. The clan wasn't so mighty then, because it numbered only around 1,500, which made it one of the smaller clans of the 1800 in the region. But all that was gonna change. Shaka brought to his clan military experience, a hardened attitude, and the determination to make what was finally his very successful. He shifted the military up a lot. Firstly, he made sure they walked barefoot instead of wearing sandals, just to make their feet tougher and to make them like more ooh-rah. That was so pathetic. An important bit was he also updated their weapons. They were used to just using throwing spears in combat and not doing any kind of hand-to-hand combat. But he gave them shorter throwing spears called ikwa, which made them learn that they had to get in close and stab a bitch in the fucking chest. The older spears were kept for the opening of a battle. The shorter spears were used after, throwing off many who were unused to hand-to-hand combat. He also armed them with ox-hide shields to protect themselves, and he brought with him innovative tactics. One such tactic was named the bullhorn, where he would have one part of his army pin the enemy down and two more parts of them come in and pincer them from the sides and then defeat them. He also kept a little bit of the army back just in case they needed to provide support. Now, he began a campaign to build the size of his army because it was still itty bitty. And this started with the assimilation of neighbouring clans. Some through diplomacy, some through war. My favourite part about this is, from accounts, he was low-key a petty nigger. Some of the clans he started with were just the ones that were headed up by men that picked on him when he was a kid when he'd been ousted. He made sure that they got murdered. After a few years, his army had quadrupled in size and was being talked about across the hundreds of neighbouring clans. After the king of the Nwandwe nation murdered his former chieftain Dingiswayo, he wasted no time in seeking revenge. This is brutal. He first got to the king's mother, locking her in a house to be devoured alive by hungry, ravenous wild dogs. And then he torched the whole building. He then went onwards to battle with the king's forces, winning but sustaining quite a lot of casualties within his army. And this was the final straw for him in a life that had been plagued with difficulties amongst the successes. He lashed out at everyone around him in his grief, killing people for not mourning enough and also killing pregnant women and their husbands. Even allegedly killed pregnant cows so that calves would even know the pain of losing their mum. In 1828, after pushing his people too far, sending them to battle after battle, his half-brothers, at the push of his aunt, conspired to murder him and assassinated him later that year. While Shaka did die a heartbroken shell of a man, he had achieved something in his life, something that barely anyone does. He had transformed his clan from something so unknown and overlooked to one so famous and respected his clan is now named kind of across the earth. And his name too. Now we're heading to West Africa to talk about an empire and a man that feels especially relevant today, seeing as so many of you people are so obsessed with shmoney. So welcome to the Mali Empire. That's Mali, M-A-L-I, not M-A-R-L-E, like Bob Marley, or like the Mali Empire from Attack on Titan. Was that an empire? I can't remember. They're evil. Fun fact, the Mali Empire was the largest empire Africa has ever seen. And it lasted a good 4 centuries. It had its birth when the Mandinka people were under a prince called Sundiata Keita, known as the Lion King, for bringing his people together and forming a centralized government. And from there, it kept expanding. At its height, it included Mali, Guinea, Senegal, Mauritania, the Gambia, and some of Niger. In 1311, the empire was ruled by Mansa Abubakar II, the nephew of Sundiata. While he was flourishing and abundant with power, there was something else he sought more of: knowledge. He wanted to know more about the Atlantic Ocean, specifically where it ended and what was at the end of it. So he handed his throne over to his brother, Mansa Musa, and he took a giant expedition of ships to go sail and find out. But they never returned. The Kind of official story goes that he was lost at sea, but some historians do contend, saying he made it all the way to America. Either way, he went down in history as a voyager king. Mansa Musa, however, was now left with a whole empire. He inherited it in great strength and had already been working towards it anyway because he was Abu Bakr's deputy. He wasted no time in seeking to optimize it though. He quickly went on to absorb more lands into his territory. Timbuktu, a trading city, salt-bearing cities like Takaza, and he also took over rival territories. The Hausa to the east and the Fulani to the west. The goal here was to take over regions that could rake in that shmoney. And as he did that, he increased the worth of the empire. Peak, which was under him, it was worth an estimated 400 million US dollars. Yeah. Take that in, man. I still have to pause every time I read that because, man. Now, the next decade, in 1324, Mansa Musa conducted his Hajj. For those who don't know, Hajj is an annual pilgrimage to Mecca. Every Muslim is expected to do this journey at least once in their lifetime to demonstrate their faith to Allah. Now, for those of you who are really shit at geography like me, Mali to Mecca isn't an easy, quick journey. You know, they didn't have aeroplanes. They didn't even have cars. Obviously, it was like the 1300s. Imagine just one car. Toot toot beep beep. And everyone's like, what is this sorcery? But Musa, the entrepreneur that he was, used this to his advantage, seeing the journey as an opportunity to spread the greatness of his empire. Though he did mingle and interact a lot on the way, he really didn't need to. His entourage would have said enough for him. 60,000 people, 21,000 kilograms of gold, 100 elephants, 80 camels, and Law Roach's lace front. During his pilgrimage though, he was actually giving away gold. You know, kind of like, we're the richest people in the world, come trade with us. I don't need this. You peasants have this. You peasant have this one gold bar. This will change your life. It won't do anything for me. Oh, it's pocket change, really. When he got to Cairo in Egypt, he actually gave them so much gold to them that he actually made the price of gold there fall, which fucked their economies for years. Much like Liz Truss did for the UK when she was Prime Minister for 40 days and 40 nights. Some say he was just being nice, but I still stand with what I said before. Because in giving away all this gold, people would know then that the place to go if they wanted gold, the place to ally themselves with if they wanted prosperity, was Mali. But Musa wasn't just a rich guy with a penchant for conquering and giving away gold. He was at heart a scholar. After he'd taken Timbuktu and Gao, he made sure to have them fitted with more libraries and cultural centres, and invite scholars and architects from across the Islamic world to come and make them the best they could be, and that included shaping them in his image. Timbuktu itself stayed an integral part of the empire long after Musa's passing, remaining an important hub for learning and trade for the next couple of centuries. Musa died around 1337. Leet. Do you remember that? I don't know if I'm exposed to myself. Gamers nerd 1337. Leet. Sorry. Leaving a well put together empire for his sons to inherit. However, it would never attain the level of wealth, power and influence it had during the zenith of his reign ever again. Infighting, territory conflicts, and generally poor management eventually led to the downfall of this empire. But that was centuries later. But still, he'd done in his life what few could ever dream of achieving, and is still remembered for that today. Mansa Musa, the richest man to have ever lived. How you doing? How you doing so far? Enjoying it? Need to get another drink? Go. How you doing? Enjoying it so far? You need to get a drink, some snacks? Go. Move, or you will be moved. But now. He was taking too long to get to a good bit, so I'll do it for him. You recognize this costume? You recognize these fighters? Well, they're based on a real army of women fighters. From modern day South Benin, from the years 1600 to 1904, existed the Dahomey Kingdom. And boy, were they great. They were developed among the Fon people, or the Dahomeans, who are now the largest ethnic group in Berlin. In the 1700s, it expanded by conquering nearby cities, including Ouidah, which itself was a key city in its own empire. Ouidah was on the coast, which gave the Dahomeans a big advantage. You see, at this time, there was endless war across West Africa, with states fighting for control and safety, in the same way the rest of the world did and does across time. This constant warring, for Dahomey at least, had meant a complete decimation of their male population. This led the king to have to switch things up a little bit by recruiting women into the army. King Webaja, known as the first king of Dahomey, began by recruiting elephant hunters that already worked under him into his army. Over time, more women joined the military. Some are rifle users, others archers, some more even spies. They are known by many names, including that Ahosi, which means king's wives, or Mino, which means our mothers. And ain't that right? Because I know my mum could fuck a bitch up. She be acting all cute like, but the way this woman swings the handbag, the way this woman throws her slipper, it's giving army material. They weren't allowed to marry or have children, and the work they did to be ready for the military was physically intensive and grueling. One of the exercises had them storm and run up a big wall covered in thorny vines to toughen their skin and make them indifferent to pain. And I can't lie, given their reputation, I'll say it worked. They were excellent at hand-to-hand combat, using weapons that are kind of like machetes. And they were so fucking stacked that when they were on the battlefield, wearing matching apparel to the few men that were left, the Europeans they would later come to fight couldn't actually tell between them which ones were the men until they got close. And I guess they saw those titties as they cut them down. Speaking of the Europeans, who ended up giving them the nickname that a lot of them know them by, the Amazons, based after the amazing warriors of their legend, they also called them Black Sparta for their astounding military prowess. By the mid-1800s, there were around 3,000 of them, and they were superior to the men amongst their rank. During war, the enemies they captured would either be executed or enslaved, with those prisoners becoming labor to better the empire or be sold to Europeans for weapons to keep fighting the wars. And yes, I said slaves. I will come back to this after I finish the story because I got shit to say. Now, eventually, the Dahomey region was annexed by the French into French West Africa. But thankfully, they gained independence in 1960 as the Republic of Dahomey, and that renamed itself Benin in 1975. The reality, though, is it is going to take some time to repair the damage that the French did while they were there. But the legacy of women fighters still lives on happily in the country, of course. And now, over here as well, with stories like Black Panther and the Woman King paying homage to them. Their names will never be forgotten, and their ferocity, devotion to their king, and their amazing physiques, goddamn, will always be remembered. Now, back to slavery. Dahomey was a kingdom that had its rise after the Europeans already come in and getting up to their colonizer shenanigans in Africa, and so obviously did have that influence. But even before the Europeans did come and ruin shit, there already was like a different form of slavery in Africa. I say slavery, people call it that, but to me it honestly reads more like a kind of serfdom. Let me read you an excerpt. Slavery existed in Africa before the arrival of Europeans, as did a slave trade that exported a small number of sub-Saharan Africans to North Africa, the Middle East, and the Persian Gulf. But this system of slavery differed from the plantation slavery that developed in the New World. Hereditary slavery, extending over several generations, was rare. Most slaves in Africa were female. Women were preferred because they bore children and because they performed most field labor. Slavery in early sub-Saharan Africa took a variety of forms. While most slaves were field workers, some served in royal courts, where they served as official soldiers, servants, and artisans under a system known as pawnship. Youths served as collateral for their families' debts. If their parents or kin defaulted on these debts, then these young girls were forced to labor to repay these debts. In many instances, these young women eventually married into their owner's lineage, and their family's debt was cancelled. Under a system known as clientage, slaves owed a share of their crop or their labor to an owner or a lineage, yet they owned the bulk of their crop and were allowed to participate in the society's political activities. These slaves were often treated no differently than other peasant or tenant farmers. So it was much less severe than other versions of slavery, and obviously nowhere near as bad as chattel slavery. Not to play comparisons at all, but I also don't want to shy away from this because I think still a lot of people do have this warped narrative over the reality. I feel like I've seen a lot of people, especially maybe people not connected to Africa, like all of history in Africa, pre-colonialism, to be like this sort of utopia. But it wasn't. It was human just like anywhere else. But just because some kingdoms sold what is essentially like serfs or prisoners of war to the Europeans, I personally don't think it makes them as bad as them, number one. I honestly couldn't find any information to suggest that people knew what they were selling slaves into, number one, in terms of the chattel slavery, because obviously they were taking all these slaves off land. Also, in a lot of the situations they were in when it comes to warring with the Europeans, they did have their backs up against the fucking wall. But a big reason of backing for chattel slavery for the white man ultimately was like extreme racism and believing all Africans were beneath them. And they enslaved millions over their time, extinguishing countless bloodlines and causing trauma so bad it still ripples through the genes of many of us today. So like I said, the reality of most people of West Africa had no idea what they were selling their captives into. So I'm just going to end on a rant because it just pisses me off when slavery deniers or whatever will be like, oh, but the blacks sold people too. Or like the Cooney black people say, we sold our own people and shit. Like, be fucking for real and pick up an actual history book. Obviously, I've already got another essay on my channel that touches on more the effects of colonialism, more around religion and culture, which you should watch if you haven't. But the reality in this situation was the white man and all their forms, the British, the Portuguese, the Spanish, the French. They're all so slimy and fucking manipulative, man. Like, all the accounts I read from all these instances of colonialism, it was like really disgusting. And the reality of it, it's just many of them found flames and feuds that were already ignited before they got there and fanned those flames and those blazes and stoked them and then acted like they would have people's best interests at heart. And then they'll go back and write these horrible, very racist, disgusting accounts about the same people. They're like, oh yes, we're on your side. It was disgusting. But yeah, anyways, after that rant, I really do hope you enjoy this. And let me know if you like this and I can do another. You know what's really interesting to me when I did all this research? Number one was just like reading all these stories, but also like different cultures and traditions, and also I guess as well, like kind of grew up a bit boyish and I was like, oh my god, yeah, war, so cool. And obviously now I'm like, war is fucking horrible. But reading about different tacticians and militaries and ways of adapting that a lot of these cultures did was really fucking interesting. And also like different lineages. I really like these specific stories. And Mansa Musa was my favorite because it's just this guy traveling with all this gold and this whole entourage just like, hey there, like to everybody, tanking the economy. It's jokes, but I think the main thing is like there's such a vast history that us, especially who maybe don't have such a connection to Africa, like motherland, whatever country you're from, or even if you're not aware of what country you're from, there's a lot of history that the West tries to block us from, and also that they've tried to dilute or change or lie about. So it also feels really important to me to be another voice trying to preserve this history and share this history. If I remember, I'm going to try and put some links to where I got some of this information, but definitely encourage you all to just do a bit more reading anyway, and definitely use discernment. If I'm being honest, like I tried to just find sites that were clearly written by black people, and if I'm being real, African people, like people actually connected to the culture of the story, because they'd be more likely to not have that like racist narrative that a lot of, like I said before, white scholars do. Not to say that I've ignored everything they do, but sometimes for extra fact checking or more information or a different perspective on different people, it was great. But yeah, thanks so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed. I hope you like my costume. It's in tatters. I'm on airplane mode and I'm still getting a notification. Shut up. This costume is like 4 years old and I haven't worn it in a while, but it spent time in a museum. You know, because I'm amazing. I made this, but I hope you liked it. I hope you enjoyed it. And lots of love, and I'll see you soon for the next video. Take care. Bye.